Today with us is Paolo Balzecchi, a systems engineer with over 20 years of experience in the IT sector, expert in VMware vSphere, Omnissa Horizon, backup and disaster recovery solutions, and Microsoft technologies, as well as a blogger and YouTube creator. Paolo shares his passion and expertise in designing and managing virtual environments and data protection. Welcome, Paolo, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Hi, Valerio. It's a pleasure. And yes, you've pretty much already introduced me. So in the end, there's not much more to add regarding what I do on a daily basis. I basically build and design robust, reliable infrastructures for various companies and organizations. And as you mentioned, I work in these areas from virtualization to backup VDI infrastructures. These are the main fields I operate in professionally. So let's say that lately, the overall demand for virtualization is gradually shifting a bit, especially in terms of the specific brands and solutions being used, which we might also have a chance to talk about as well during our discussion.
Right. In fact, the reason for inviting you is thanks to your experience to compare VMware ESXi and Proxmox. Now, Paolo, can you explain to us why virtualization is so essential for today's corporate IT infrastructure?
Yes. Well, it's clear that for those who work with companies of any size, whether small, medium, or large, we see that there are a ton of services from simple time tracking, managing timestamps, to where to store files, to providing various services like in manufacturing companies. And obviously nowadays, it's unthinkable to imagine having a dedicated server for every single service. We would need enormous data centers just to meet the needs and requests of a single company. So in this way, virtualization comes to our aid because it allows us to consolidate all these services onto a few pieces of hardware, so onto a few servers that, when set up and configured in a certain way, allow us to provide various services. So what is the big advantage of virtualization? Compared to the physical world, it is much easier to manage. In terms of resource allocation, let's imagine, for example, changing a disk in a physical server. If I need to replace a disk or expand a server's capacity, I have to power it down, open it up, install the disk, turn it back on, and that takes quite a bit of time. This downtime means the service is unavailable, which isn't always a good thing, or it forces us as system administrators to do the work outside of regular hours, so in the evening or in the worst cases during the night. But in the virtual world, I can simply do it with a click. So I can extend a resource for a specific server or for a group of servers in just a few minutes or even seconds simply by clicking a button. And so this is the main advantage. So many services, less hardware, speed in applying new configurations, and above all, minimizing downtime as much as possible. In other words, downtime is almost non-existent, especially when it comes to disk expansions and so on. Only in a few cases, but we're talking just a few minutes. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest advantages.
Very clear. Paolo, VMware ESXi is one of the most widely used solutions on the market. In your opinion, what are its main strengths, especially for large companies?
Well, let's say that VMware has been, let's say for many years now, the market leader when it comes to virtualization. And over time, it has achieved a certain level of stability and above all, scalability that not all other solutions or competitors can offer. Management at the moment, so as of today, isn't that complex because we can perform many operations directly from the GUI. So we access our console and can configure whatever we need. And especially with the latest versions, it has been greatly simplified and above all, automated. Also, let's say that the VMware platform is still considered the industry benchmark and standard for software developers. Many applications are developed specifically around the VMware environment, so it still serves as a key reference point for those working in the field of software development. And furthermore, since it's such a widely used product, there are a lot of people who work with VMware. So for a company that needs to handle turnover, say if someone leaves, it's relatively easy to find a replacement, which would actually be a bit more complicated, especially for something that is a little more niche or specialized. Also, there's a very large and active community behind it with programs such as the Expert program that allow many people from different backgrounds and with various levels of experience to connect, essentially creating a supportive community and a strong interconnected network of people. So whenever you have a problem, encounter an issue, or have something you want to ask, you can get functional, practical, and helpful answers, especially from people who are reliable, knowledgeable, and experienced in the field. This makes it much easier to find solutions and support when you need it most.
Based on your experience, what are the main limitations of VMware ESXi, especially in terms of cost, complexity, or compatibility?
This has become quite a significant sore point recently, and it has been an issue lately. Certainly at this particular moment, cost is truly the main limitation, even more so than any technical ones, because ever since the acquisition, costs have become especially significant. Even so, we're still talking about a top-tier product, so it's very comprehensive, and during software selection processes, especially for virtualization, VMware is always among the top 3. I'm curious to see what will happen, especially in 2025, because not all companies nowadays can afford the slight price adjustments that have been made to VMware's price list. So that's how I see it. Thank you. Let's say its position as a leader is a bit shaky, because obviously small companies can't suddenly bear exorbitant costs overnight, which unfortunately has happened. Then we also have to consider the hardware side of things, how hardware vendors will move, because at the moment, let's say, there aren't many hardware compatibility limitations, since there are still many vendors who produce VMware certified server hardware and also specific software for this platform. So it's all still to be seen. And obviously, when using VMware, you have to consider where it's being applied. It's a bit like saying, I'm taking a Ferrari to drive on a dirt road or just to go from my house to the newsstand. No, obviously, if someone can afford it, there are no problems. We're not living in an ideal world. You also have to take a moment to consider what the actual needs are, because then you have to maintain the infrastructure. It has to be functional. And in case of problems, you need to know where to intervene. So VMware, yes, it's fine for many, but not for everyone, precisely because it requires several things.
In fact, there are solutions, open source or free ones, like Proxmox, for example. For those who aren't familiar with it, what is Proxmox and what are its main strengths compared to VMware?
Yes, so Proxmox has actually been around for quite some time, but it's become very popular over the past year and a half or so. It's a virtualization solution, just like VMware, Hyper-V, Nutanix, and so on. The concept remains the same. Its distinctive feature is that it's a completely open source software. What does this mean? It means that if a company wants to adopt it, they don't have to spend a fortune on licenses. So I can take it, install it, configure it, and I can take advantage of all the features it offers me. It's something that's stable, it works, but it depends. Obviously, it always depends on your needs. Behind Proxmox, we have a strong community. So there's a very active forum, which allows us to get help if we have any problems or need to configure our environment in a certain way. Because after all, Proxmox isn't exactly simple. You need to get used to it a bit, especially if, like me, you come from the VMware world. But the big advantage is that for small businesses, it can be a valid alternative, because obviously, if I only need to run a few servers or a few services, it could be the ideal solution. And
Proxmox offers features like KVM, LXC, clustering, and integrated backup management. How do these compare to those of VMware?
well, let's say that both of these providers do indeed offer this type of service, but it's quite clear that we're talking about comparing a relatively young newcomer with one that's already well established and present in the market. So what I notice at first glance is that Proxmox is still, in my opinion, a bit too cumbersome to use, even though I should say it's actually very useful for those who, if you have technicians in-house who know how to get their hands dirty, it gives you a flexibility that VMware doesn't offer, because since Proxmox is open source, you could potentially even make integrations or customizations that would be unthinkable and impossible on a platform like VMware. However, it's very, let's say, very complex with lots and lots of operations, and you have to access things via the command line, so you don't have the graphical interface that lets you click wherever you want and makes your life easier. In fact, we can also see that even Hyper-V and Nutanix themselves haven't managed to unseat VMware, so VMware is still the benchmark. However, I find that in the latest versions, a lot of progress has been made. They've simplified many things, fixed some bugs, and added some features that, by the way, VMware might not even have, so it can definitely be a valid alternative. Or at the very least, a replacement if you're planning to actually change the platform you use. Let's say I'm not really convinced by the backup part because it's very basic, better than nothing, of course. But personally, I prefer to rely on solutions specifically designed for backups so I can protect and cover all my needs and above all, my data.
Yes, you can take chances with data. So based on your experience, in which scenarios does Proxmox represent a particularly advantageous choice for companies?
Well, the main advantage is definitely the licensing issue. There basically aren't any, at least if I want to try it out, play around with it, use it, and even put it into production, I don't have to deal with crazy costs. If there aren't any complex services or the infrastructure, if the company's infrastructure isn't particularly critical, Proximo can definitely be a platform to consider, if not actually adopt. So let's say the target for now is at least small and medium-sized businesses, especially in situations where there's a limited budget. Of course, everything ultimately revolves around that if I don't have budget issues, obviously. But here's something very important to keep in mind. Be careful not to fall into the trap of thinking it's open source, it doesn't cost me anything, so I'll just implement it in my company and be carefree. Be careful, yes, it's open source, but Proxmox also provides paid support options, and support is something absolutely fundamental in the business world. Personally, I am against using free solutions in a business context. Because if we have a problem, let's take an example, a manufacturing company. I'm using my Proxmox solution. It's open source, so I don't pay anything. Everything is going great, but then it crashes for whatever reason, and I can't get it back up. I don't know what to do anymore, and my production is at a standstill. So the release of patches, bugs are a daily occurrence. The release of security patches, ransomware, or in any case, let's say all those security aspects that need to be kept under control are important. And you don't have these things if you don't have support behind you. So the release of patches, release of fixes, direct technical support from those who are developing and maintaining this platform, these are important aspects. So Proxmox, yes, but if you use it in production, I strongly recommend subscribing to the support plan, which doesn't cost that much, but really can save your life. Thank you. Then let's see if when the company is at a standstill for a week, it would have cost less to just get the subscription.
Yes, no, of course, it's clear. So your point of view is very clear. In fact, the next question is, what are the main challenges a company should consider when migrating from VMware to Proximo? But in your answer, you already addressed this question, and it seems to me that support is absolutely fundamental, because without support, you end up with a problem.
Exactly. And let's also consider another point. The future of VMware is now completely uncertain. There's a lot of instability, and companies are especially alarmed. In fact, it's no coincidence that these new platforms, or rather these platforms, are gaining traction, not only because they've adjusted their pricing, but now they're focusing exclusively on WCF, so Cloud Foundation, which isn't simple. It's quite complicated, and not all companies have the resources, even in terms of personnel, to be able to implement these things. Because, okay, I can hire a consultant to set up the infrastructure for me, but then I have to maintain that infrastructure myself. And if I don't have in-house know-how and always have to rely on external help, obviously the costs increase significantly. So you really need to carefully consider your choice. But given how things are going, I predict that Proxmox will gain traction in 2025 and really take off.
What technical skills are required for a smooth transition?
So let's start with the aspect that's painful. Unfortunately, one of the first things to look at when doing a migration, so if I want to change platforms, is we need to talk about compatibility and compatibility matrices. If I speak about VMware, when I want to install something on a server, we have vendors who certify that the hardware has been tested and certified for the VMware platform. Unfortunately, this is not yet the case for Proximus, so we need to keep that in mind and thoroughly test before putting anything into production. This is because the drivers might not work or might not even be available. The same goes for firmware, so I can't put an unstable system into production because obviously when something happens due to an incompatibility, by the time I figure out the cause and above all fix it, quite a bit of time could pass. The same applies to software. If a company is using, for example, Omnisa Horizon or VMware Horizon, these have been developed for vSphere. So it's clear that if I want to switch to Proxmox right now, as things stand today, it's just not possible. We have to wait and see if in the future Omnisa also develops for this platform. Technical support, as we mentioned earlier, is important. We need to have it. And for this reason, having technical support behind you means that any issues with drivers, patches, or bugs are resolved quickly. These are the prerequisites to consider when planning a migration. Then, of course, the costs of migration depend a bit on the size of the infrastructure to be migrated, the services involved, and the overall complexity. I mean, it's one thing to say I have an infrastructure with 2 or 3 nodes and I want to migrate it. Then it's another thing to say I have an enterprise infrastructure with multiple locations, many nodes, many clusters spread out. So obviously this also needs to be taken into account. So it's actually quite complicated to say it costs a certain amount. It depends. Obviously, you need to do an analysis. Normally, when you want to do a migration, there's always an initial meeting where you assess the environment to get an idea and then to provide a cost estimate. Then, of course, you need to have the technical skills because Proxmox, especially on the networking side, isn't that simple. It's like VMware. Everything revolves around that because often the problems are networking related. If you're not familiar with routing, firewalls, and everything that goes on in the networking world, and you don't have those skills in-house, relying on external help is possible, but it means higher costs. So that's another thing to keep in mind. The migration itself, moving a machine from VMware to Proxmox, is actually the simplest part because in the latest versions, Proxmox itself has a tool that lets you import virtual machines directly, or you can use other solutions as well. Thank you. For example, there's Starwind Converter, which allows me to make this transition, or if I use a backup software like Veeam or Nakivo, just to name 2, I can do it directly, back up, and then restore directly onto the other platform. So there are ways to carry out a smooth and painless technical migration, but you need to pay attention to the hardware being used, the applications running on it, and how the new infrastructure will behave.
It's clear. How do you see the future of virtual infrastructures? Do you think VMware will be able to maintain its dominance, or will open source tools like Proxmox gain ground?
Well, based on what we've discussed and what's happening, for example, I don't see VMware in a very good position. The fact that they've adjusted their pricing and are focusing on a specific product. If I were in a company, I would start looking around because obviously if today it costs me a certain amount and tomorrow I find myself facing skyrocketing uncontrollable costs, it's clear that I need to find an alternative. Virtualization absolutely won't die. In fact, there will be other vendors offering their solutions. Proxmox is one of these. If we think about it, up until 3 years ago, you barely even heard about Proxmox. Ever since VMware was acquired by Broadcom, now everyone is talking about Proxmox. And the fact that major backup solution vendors have included support for Proxmox means that for them too, they believe in this platform. And in fact, I'm seeing that even at the corporate level, requests for implementation are starting to come in, something that until a few years ago was rare.
Yes, but it's like everything else. If you remember when plasma TVs first came out, they were these big boxes. Well, less bulky than regular TVs, but still. And then, little by little, as they became more popular, they improved.
Let's also consider the fact that I can install it in my lab next time. I can play around with it. Thank you. I don't have any deadlines. I don't have any issues at all. When I have my own infrastructure, that's mine forever, precisely because it's open source. So I have the chance to test it, take a good look at it, and then decide.
No, that's clear. That's clear. Paolo, a final message for our viewers. How can IT professionals best prepare themselves to take advantage of platforms like Proxmox or VMware?
Well, in my opinion, there are 3 points that could be useful. The first is to do your research and study. Unfortunately, as they say, nobody is born knowing everything. So it's clear that when a new technology or a new proposal comes out, you need to look into it, gather information from multiple sources, and not rely solely on one platform, magazine, or blog. Do your research. By now, in 2024 to 2025, we have the internet that provides us with billions of pieces of information, so documentation and studying are important. But in my opinion, the most important thing is to practice, because if I only study or read, it doesn't help me at all. If I don't practice, I'll forget it. It's a bit like learning a language. If I study English but never use it, I'll never really learn it well and I'll probably lose it. And to support your practice, since there are so many solutions available now, it's a good idea to set up a small lab. Thank you. By having a small lab, for example, I have my own lab where I do all my things, my tests, my studies. This way I can practice. And if I need to implement something I've never seen before, I do it at home, try to simulate it and acquire the knowledge that will then be useful when I go to do the actual work. And in my opinion, these are the fundamental points.
I've interviewed several professionals here on my channel, and everyone agrees on the point is to study and then practice, but everyone says the same thing. Study. And usually at the end of every interview, I always ask professionals a question to help young people, precisely because those with many years of experience, like you can, so to speak, give them some guidance. If a young person wants to enter the field as a VMware, Proxmox, or Windows System Administrator, what would you advise them to study? Based on your experience, which path would you recommend to them?
Well, first of all, try to carefully identify what the current market trend is and where things are heading, because it's a bit like this. If I start studying something that is very niche, I'll likely have fewer opportunities available compared to if I start or learn something that is widely used. So it's a bit like the whole Mac versus traditional PC discussion. Macs are very niche, so there are also fewer companies that use only Macs compared to those that use traditional PCs. So here too, the question is, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to start getting into virtualization? Perfect. What do we have at the moment? At the moment, we have the most well-known brands. Proxmox is kind of an outsider. Maybe by investing in Proxmox, I also study other platforms and I try to specialize in a couple of them. Knowing everything about everything is impossible, because knowing a little bit about everything means knowing everything poorly or not much at all. So you need to focus on a couple of platforms, maybe considering Proxmox, which is becoming the outsider. The market will open up and someone might say, I'll offer myself as a Proxmox system administrator, who are in high demand, because be aware there aren't many people around who know this platform. It's one thing to do a basic installation, but it's another thing when you have a large infrastructure and start running into problems. The people who are skilled can get their hands on it, or those who have experience. So in my opinion, these are the suggestions I can give to anyone who wants to get into this field of IT, this sector of IT.
Regarding infrastructure, yes, I also think it's a good idea to invest in Proxmox. Well, you should know VMware because it's the most widely used, but invest in Proxmox because it could be, or at least it seems to be, the future.
Exactly. If you see that it's gaining traction, you already know what I'm talking about. So you just need to dig deeper. And
listen, still regarding the students, many have difficulties when it comes to virtualization. I see it from the networking side. When we talk about VLANs, especially those studying for the CCNA, they get completely lost. And even when it comes to VMware and with the virtual switch and all that, if I, as a young person, study VMware and Proxmox, could the things I learn here eventually be useful for the cloud as well, since that's so popular nowadays?
yes, absolutely. Because in the end, whether we're talking about the cloud or about companies, system administrators basically live inside that building called the data center. So whether the data center belongs to a local company or acts as a provider, obviously all the knowledge gets applied. Maybe the only thing that changes is that the products are developed for a provider or for a company. The difference then comes down to management, but these are all concepts that are definitely useful, especially for the cloud, which is very popular and is a solution that's really taking off. But even there, in the long run, we run into the cost factor because nothing is given for free. And many companies have actually gone back. Still being able to say, okay, I don't want to invest in internal hardware because of maintenance, possible disposal, or any kind of subscription. I rely on the cloud. I pay for the quotas I need, and I no longer have to worry about the physical part. I'll take care of the configuration. But if a disk breaks, or if it's too hot or too cold, I don't have those problems anymore. In fact, a lot of people are making this choice. Of course, cloud means you need to have a good connection available. So depending on where you are, if the connection or bandwidth is poor, obviously, if I move everything to the cloud, that could become a problem.
Of course, I'll leave your contact information in the video description. Anyway, where can viewers find you to learn more or contact you for consulting?
Yes, so I'm the author of the blog No Lab, No Party, where I basically talk about virtualization, backup, VDI, Active Directory, and so on. I've had it for over 13 years now, and I also have a YouTube channel called IT Tech Pills, where I specifically talk about the world of backup. So for anyone interested in delving deeper into backup topics, from concepts to the main software, you'll find all my contact information there.
Perfect. In fact, I wanted to make a video about, we found it, as I mentioned to you earlier, your blog on LinkedIn. I checked it out, and there's an article that talks about how to create nodes on Proxmox. And I said, now I'm going to follow it. I'll follow all the steps you listed so I can make a video about Proxmox and nodes. Yes, 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 I absolutely confirm. The blog is really nice. The name, I swear, we didn't come up with it. Look, it is.
It's international in any language. It's like that.
I honestly don't know how you managed to come up with a name like that, but I have to say it's really, really nice, and your blog is truly remarkable. It's absolutely full of helpful information, even for those who want to try out different configurations. It's genuinely interesting.
Yes, and I'll confess a secret to you. I didn't do it because I want to be a blogger. I did it for myself, meaning I do something, I study something, I learn something, I write it down for myself. And then wherever I am, I can ask myself, how did I do that configuration again? I know where to go look for it. So my main goal was just that, to have a knowledge base at my disposal. But if I'm making it available to myself, why not make it available to everyone? Then if someone else finds it useful, even better.
You do the same thing I do with videos. There are some videos where maybe I don't remember how to configure something, so I go and watch the videos I made myself.
Exactly, that's it. I mean, blogs and YouTube, let's say these types of channels are extremely useful and helpful at a certain level. Books are certainly valuable, of course, but by the time a book is printed and released, it's already outdated, whereas blogs and YouTube videos are current and up to date. Plus, I can actually see how something is done because with a video, I can watch the process step by step. And I have an additional source of information.
No, clearly.